Whenever I analyze a paper, the very first thing that I'm trying to identify is what's actually the main problem, the main question, and the main puzzle that a paper is trying to answer. Previous president of Indonesia tried to strategically assault our democratic confidence.
Welcome to the Student Talk series, a podcast where IIIU students discuss various stories about students' life that the general public may not be familiar with.
Dari awal masuk aja udah ditanya, kamu interest di bidang apa, gitu ya.
There are still many people who don't even care about their healthy lifestyle.
All hilarious, engaging, and heartbreaking stories will be told lightly and in casual way. Enjoy the show.
Now, we'll move on to the next section of the interview. So I would like to know, you already been awarded as the best MA student paper in comparative study on democratic backlashing in Turkey and Indonesia. You know, what are the main similarities in these two countries, and what made your paper to be awarded as the best paper? You know, without
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, what made my paper, being awarded as the best paper? You have to talk to my lecturers for that. I asked my lecturer for that. Like, did you guys make a mistake, perhaps? Is it really? Do I really deserve the best paper? I don't know, but well, thank you very much. It's a huge privilege to be awarded best paper. Let's talk about the paper, right? I think whenever I analyze a paper, the very first thing that I'm trying to identify is what's actually the main problem, the main question, and the main puzzle that a paper is trying to answer, right? And then how do they answer that question, right? What is the hypothesis? What's the research method that are being used? And so I'd like to talk about my research puzzle first in that paper. I'm trying to compare the current state of democracy in both countries, Indonesia and Turkey. Just for background information, it's useful to think about whether we can compare Turkey and Indonesia, because people would say that, look, Indonesia and Turkey is not comparable in so many respects. I would say, yes, I do agree. These two countries are not really 100% comparable in many respects. However, there are important dimensions when they are actually similar. And one of the most important dimension is that they're both Muslim democracy. If you look at OIC member states, right? If you look at almost all Muslim countries in the world, how many are there that are democracies? Not much, right? Right. Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Brunei, Jerusalem, Malaysia. Even Malaysia is not a democracy. Hardly can be, considered as democracy, right? And so Muslim democracy is a very rare occasion among Muslim states, right? That is one similarity between Indonesia and Turkey. The second, and I think one of the most important similarity, is that for 2 decades, or let's say for the last decade, both countries experience what scholars called democratic backsliding. Democratic backsliding is basically a state where countries experience a deteriorating quality of their democracy, right? So instead of getting more and more democratic, they're getting more and more autocratic, right? So that's what we call democratic backsliding in political science. Those are two main similarities between Indonesia and Turkey. Now, the main difference, and this is the puzzle, right? The main difference is when Turkey and Indonesia, both Muslim democracies and both experiencing democratic backsliding for a few years now, it was only Turkey who fell into autocracy, right? But not Indonesia, right? And so the question is, why does Indonesia is so resilient in at least defending their democracy? On the other hand, Turkey can right away fall into autocracy, right? That is the main question that I'm trying to answer. And so and the way I answer it is I also test a new perspective or a new hypothesis from, I forgot the name of the scholar, but it was a very interesting paper when I read it. And I thought, what if I apply this theory, right, in analyzing Turkey and Indonesia? What will happen? And I think it provides a very interesting insight, because the theory kind of said that, look, when you have democratic backsliding, usually it was caused by the incumbent or the government, the elected officials, right? For instance, in the case of Donald Trump, America is now having democratic backsliding because of Donald Trump, right? Turkey at that time were having a democratic backsliding because of Erdogan, right? Erdogan strategically tried to manipulate the institutions, the democratic institution in Turkey. He also manipulated the constitutions and law enforcement as well, and he managed, right, to did so. Indonesia, it's open out there. Jokowi tried the same thing. The previous president of Indonesia tried to strategically assault our democratic confidence, right? But the difference between these two countries was that what the opposition did, right, against assaults on democracy. In the case of Turkey, the response from Erdogan's oppositions was quite radical, and because the oppositions opt the radical stance to defend democracy, Erdogan replied with equally radical measures, and that means shutting down democracy. On the other hand, on Indonesia, when the government tried to assault, or when those in power tried to assault democracy, the opposition did not respond using radical measures, but they only respond using moderate measures. They only criticize policies. And so they managed to buy some time for the next election. And that's why our democracy holds. So that is the main insight of the paper, but I'm still working on the details. But that is the big argument that I'm trying to.
Wow, I can now understand why your paper was awarded as the best paper.
Well, thank
looking
you.
Looking at it, your topic is unique, and it is also very, very relevant. Trying to compare between Turkey and Indonesia, as you explained, both are Muslim majority countries, and we all understand that in most Muslim nation countries, they don't follow the principles of democracy. So moving on, what advice do you have for young scholars, young academicians who wants to, promote democracy? Because I can just feel that, you are someone who is very, very passionate about democracy and, how for countries to implement democracy and use it to actually guide their development. So what advice do you have for young scholars who want to, promote democracies, in the world?
Okay.
Will you advise them to engage into research advocacy, or things like that?
Yeah, you might be disappointed with my answer, but I would say you don't have to promote democracy. Is that comment surprising? I hope not. I mean, okay, my paper talked about, how can we defend democracy and why some democracies failed, right? Stephen Levitsky, in his book How Democracy Dies, is a very authoritative book in this issue, right? If you live in democratic countries and you want to defend democracy, I suggest you read that book, because one of the major causes of why democracy dies is actually not from outside but from within your country. Most democracies dies because you elect the wrong leaders. you don't elect a Democrats, right? You elect demagogues, right? You elect people with autocratic tendencies, right? And so if you want to defend democracy, then you have to kick the rascals out, right? Now, that is the case. But if your objective is not political regime per se, if your objective is the prosperity of most people in your country, then I suggest you start working on the economic policy, right? If you're living in an autocracy, that means if you have, policy prescription, then what you want to do is you want to capture the ear of the autocrat, right? Once you get the ear of the autocrat, once the autocrat listens to you, he will provide you with some policy protections, right? And basically you can do anything on that once you got the ear of the autocrat. I don't think you have that imperative to have democracy, right? It really depends on your objective, right, as a scholar. So yeah, that's my take. Just because I talk and discuss, theorize about democracy, doesn't mean in real life I want to have democracy all around the world. Even though, there are some suggestions that if we add more if more countries are more democratic, the instances of war between states are lower, right? The probability, that's what we call democratic peace theory in international relations, which is really, really promising. The appeal of democracy is really promising. But I don't think that's, the only game in town.